went through your preliminary form. The goals that I have, tell me if I'm missing any from you, were eliminate your shots and medicines. You want to get off this stuff. You want to sleep well at night. You're not doing that. You want to stop feeling tired and run down. You want to lose weight.
That's it. You got it.
Those are your goals. The other complaints, you had low energy, ringing in the ears, sinus problems, postnasal drip, shortness of breath, wheezing, coughs, indigestion and reflux, loose stool, diarrhea, bloating, black and bloody mucousy stool with meat consumption, and difficulty walking, getting around, trouble losing weight, chronic and unpleasant hunger feelings, groggy after meals, strong food cravings, and anxiety about food in general. All of that stuff.
Sounds like I'm dead.
So I don't mean to, harp on the bad stuff, but, that will all, most of that should get better. My goals I'm adding in.
Which goals do you
I
have?
want you to reverse all your medical diseases, the ones that we can reverse, and most of yours we could. I told you all the risks and benefits. Based on what I told you, I would stop all these meds, and I would stop these on top of all these risks.
So that's what I'm going to try. You're going to get my best effort, I can tell you that.
Yeah, you'll do good.
Okay.
You'll do well.
By 1975, Dr. Campbell was at Cornell University, investigating what he'd discovered in the Philippines.
Our work, from the beginning, was designed, in a sense, to do two main things. One, I wanted to replicate, if possible, the Indian work, because it was so provocative. Secondly, if this is really true, I wanted to study how does it work.
Just like the Indian researchers, Campbell fed half the rats in his study a diet of 20% casein, the main protein in dairy products. The other half was fed only 5% casein. Over the 12 weeks of the study, the rats eating the higher protein diet had a greatly enhanced level of early liver cancer tumor growth. On the other hand, all of the rats eating only 5% protein had no evidence of cancer whatsoever. But Dr. Campbell decided to take these findings a step further. This time, instead of keeping his test rats on the same diet throughout the study, he kept them in one group and switched their diets back and forth, between 5 and 20% dairy protein, doing so at 3-week intervals. The results were astonishing. Whenever the rats were fed 20% protein, early liver tumor growth exploded. But when the same rats were given 5% protein, tumor growth actually went down.
I mean, this was so provocative, this information. We could turn on and turn off cancer growth just by adjusting the level of intake of that protein. Going from 5% to 20% is within the range of American experience. The typical studies on chemical carcinogens causing cancer are testing chemicals at levels maybe 3 or 4 orders of magnitude higher than we experience.
Even more surprisingly, Dr. Campbell discovered that a 20% diet of plant proteins from soybeans and wheat did not promote cancer. However, there's a long-standing belief among the public that animal protein is important for human health. Connie Dickman supports this position. Ms. Dickman is Director of Nutrition at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She's the past president of the American Dietetic Association and an advisor to the National Dairy Council.
When you eliminate animal foods from your eating plan, you run the risk of inadequate protein content. Animal proteins provide all the amino acids that we need for cell growth, tissue repair, and overall health.
Eating whole foods, it's virtually impossible to be protein deficient without being calorie deficient, because even if you take the foods that have the least amount of protein in it, let's say potatoes, for example, or rice, 8-9%. Wasn't that's the figure we more or less need.
Dr. Campbell's research led him to a conclusion about the way genes, chemicals, and nutrition interact to promote cancer.
Cancer starts with genes. It might be genes we're born with, it might be genes that are actually changed by a chemical. So those genes become capable of producing cancer cells. Whether we do or don't get cancer is primarily related to how we promote those cancer cells to grow over time. That's where nutrition comes into play. They go much more rapidly when they are fed animal protein.
Dr. Campbell and other nutritional scientists have found that only a small percentage of cancer cases are caused solely by genes.
I think the general consensus in my field is that probably not more than 1 or 2% at most is attributed to the genes we may or may not have.
And that's the most helpful and hopeful information I give people, because if you go through life thinking that what happens to you from a health perspective is based on your genes, you're a helpless victim. My diet was pretty abominable. I thought the two principal food groups were caffeine and sugar.
Dr. Pam Popper is executive director of the Wellness Forum in Columbus, Ohio, and an expert in the areas of health and nutrition.
And the women in my family are all overweight. I'm not. I don't eat and live like they do. So I've changed my health destiny by not engaging in the same habits.
Over the next several years, Dr. Campbell initiated more extensive lab studies using various animal and plant nutrients. The results were consistent. Nutrients from animal foods promoted cancer growth, while nutrients from plant foods decreased cancer growth. Yet Campbell hadn't identified a specific biological mechanism that caused the effects he observed.
And it finally occurred to me that there was no such thing as the mechanism. What we were looking at was a symphony of mechanisms. We think that nutrition is attributed to individual nutrients, and that's the way it gets marketed, and that's the way the companies tell us, so forth. When in fact, nutrition, all of it working together to create this symphony, the hundreds of thousands of different kinds of chemicals in food all kind of work together nicely. I mean, the complexity is total. That's a holistic concept, and I had to say to myself, that's a very exciting idea.
Dr. Campbell realized that his discoveries in the laboratory were significant but limited. How are these findings relevant in people? How do different types of foods affect cancer and other diseases? Campbell needed a large-scale population study. He would soon find a perfect opportunity.
So mangoes are really good. They flavor things.
Okay.
That's something you want to get a riper one.
Dr. Matt Letterman and his wife, Dr. Alona Pulde, are among a small but growing number of physicians who use a whole foods, plant-based diet as a primary treatment for their patients. From shopping with patients to teach them how to read nutrition labels.
Now, I don't care what it says on the front, the back, or the sides.
Look at the ingredients.
Okay. And that's all I care about.
To showing patients how to prepare meals. They are not your typical MDs. Doctors Letterman and Pulde use food as treatment because they feel it's the best medicine available. Medicine that not only makes their patients feel better, but that truly improves their health. In 1973, the U.S. Congress passed a new farm subsidy bill. Among other things, it included incentives that encouraged a massive increase in corn production. One of the major byproducts of this enormous corn surplus was a low-cost sweetener called high-fructose corn syrup. Companies could add this sweetener to anything from soda pop to hot dogs, and then make these products widely available at low prices. Processed sugars and other refined foods are far more calorie-dense than the whole plants they're made from. The dramatic increase in their use is a major reason why our food has become richer. To evolutionary psychologist and author Dr. Doug Lisle, the consumption of unnaturally dense foods is the main cause for the epidemic of obesity in America.
It isn't that people become more self-indulgent. It isn't because they're lazier than they ever were. What's happening is that their mechanisms of satiation are being fooled.
The process starts with a range of receptors in our stomachs that help us gauge how much food we've eaten. These include stretch receptors to help measure the sheer volume of food in our stomachs. We also have density receptors to help determine the caloric density, or what we more commonly call the richness of our food. For instance, 500 calories of natural plant food fills the stomach completely, triggering both our stretch and density receptors to signal our brain that we've had enough to eat. But 500 calories of unnaturally rich or processed food fills the stomach far less, deceiving these receptors into telling our brain that we need to eat more. Even worse is 500 calories of oil, which is almost pure fat, and barely triggers any response at all.
The problem with weight management in humans is that if you make these foods completely artificial, which we do today, you wind up with a problem that people have to overeat just to be satisfied.
But why do these concentrated foods that are so harmful to us give us so much pleasure? Dr. Lisle says the answer is related to a system called the motivational triad. This is a trio of biological mechanisms that nature has designed into every creature on Earth so they can survive to pass their genes on to the next generation. The first leg of the motivational triad is pleasure seeking.
And primarily two things are the cause of that, and those two things are food and sex. So in the case of a great white shark, it's basically got a neon sign flashing across its forehead saying food, sex, food, sex, food, sex. Unless it's a male, then it says sex, food, but it's pretty much the same thing.
The other two legs of the motivational triad are avoiding pain and doing everything with the least amount of effort.
Pleasure seeking, pain avoidance, and energy conservation. That really sums up animal behavior, whether we're talking about a paramecium under a microscope or a great white shark.
Richer foods naturally excite our senses because it's nature's way of telling us they will provide the highest amount of dietary reward with the least amount of effort. This helped our ancestors find the most calorie-dense and ripe foods available, which contributed to our survival. But in today's environment, we can artificially increase calorie density well beyond what our ancestors would have found in nature. The resulting foods give us a hypernormal amount of pleasure, leading us into something Dr. Lyle calls the pleasure trap.
What the pleasure trap is an interaction between our natural instincts, which are trying to tell us the right thing to do, and some kind of artificial modern stimulation that is piggybacking or hijacking that process. So the classic example of the pleasure trap would be drugs and drug addiction. The way drugs work is they hijack the existing pleasure circuits. When certain chemicals hit those areas, they cause feelings of euphoria and excitement.
The same drug-like effect happens when we eat highly concentrated, processed foods.
We've removed the fiber, we've removed the water, we've removed the minerals, we've done everything that we can to hyper-concentrate sugar and fat, and add a bunch of salt as well into the food. And now what the food has become is a low-grade addiction.
These things are drugs. They have other deleterious side effects, not the least of which is adding a lot of empty calories.
Dr. Terry Mason is Commissioner of Health for the City of Chicago. He's one of the few public officials in America who openly supports a plant-based diet.
If it walked, hopped, swam, crawled, slithered, had eyes, a mom and a dad, don't eat it.
Dr. Mason contends that the less affluent segments of our population have difficulty making the best food choices.
Well, first of all, the diets are calorie-rich and nutrient-poor. This is the real problem. And unfortunately, poor people are poor in everything. They're poor in health, they're poor in food choices, they're poor in almost every aspect you can think of.
This makes the less prosperous particularly vulnerable to the low-grade addiction of highly processed foods.
People want stuff that's fast, people want stuff that's quick, and they like the stuff that's salty, and they like the taste of something fried. And so those are the kinds of things that you see in our community.
Sandera Nation lives in a quiet suburb in Cleveland, Ohio, with her 5 children. In October 2008, she was stricken by a strange illness.
I want to say something, but it's not coming out. I'm getting really shaky and sweats, and then I'm cold and I'm sick and I'm fatigued and my stomach hurts and everything, so I went to the doctor. And that's when they diagnosed me with hypertension and diabetes.
Like Joya Coyne, Sandera was treated with expensive prescription drugs.
I was in denial for a while. I heard what they said, but I was in denial, like, I still ate things I shouldn't have. I didn't really get the education that I needed to know. So I really depended on that pill to save me.
Then Sandera met with Dr. Esselstyn, who recommended that she treat her illnesses with a whole foods, plant-based diet.
Come on in and we'll get to work.
I was a little nervous, but he made it real easy for me. I was real interested in what he had to say and what he was going to teach me in the new journey that I would be taking with him.
In 1974, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai was hospitalized with bladder cancer. Knowing that his disease was terminal, he decided to give his country a more complete understanding of cancer. So he initiated what would become one of the largest and most thorough scientific studies in history. 650,000 researchers cataloged the mortality patterns caused by several types of cancer for the years between 1973 and 1975. The study encompassed every county in China and over 880 million people. Zhou died in 1976, years before his study was complete.
Okay, and you'll need how many shirts then? Probably 3?
Yeah.
Zhou Enlai's cancer study would ultimately have a major impact on what Dr. Campbell himself has called the capstone of his research.
And you were there for 2 or 3 months.
Dr. Junshi Chen is now senior research professor with the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He first met Dr. Campbell at Cornell in 1980, when he was a member of the Chinese Institute of Food and Nutrition Science. The Cold War was just beginning to thaw, and Dr. Chen was among the first senior scientists from China to visit the United States. By then, Dr. Campbell had become one of the most distinguished nutritional biochemists in the world. When they discovered this book, a significant collaboration was born.
This is the Atlas of Cancer Mortality in China.
Published in 1981, the Cancer Atlas was the result of Zhou Enlai's nationwide study. It showed a highly unusual geographical distribution of different types of cancer in China, which tended to be clustered in certain hotspots. The same was true with cancer after cancer, and the counties with the highest levels were often far greater than the counties with the lowest levels.
So, for example, esophageal cancer, according to this cancer map, the mortality has 400-fold difference among different counties in China.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I understood that in the United States, only several-fold difference.
Maybe twofold. That's all we say.
Yeah. So that caught our attention in terms of why. Because they are all Chinese. Genetically, they are all the same. And why they have so much difference in single cancer mortality. So we believe it has to be related to the environment, the big environment. And from our professional perspective, of course, it's diet and the nutrition.
Dr. Chen, he said, why don't we just go there and do a study?
For Dr. Campbell, it was the opportunity he'd been looking for. Among other things, he could examine how his observations about liver cancer in Filipino children and the findings from his lab studies applied to a large human population. The project would consider 367 diet and health-related variables, making it one of the most ambitious nutritional studies ever conceived. Dr. Campbell and his associates carefully chose 65 counties scattered across China. These counties were mainly located in rural or semi-rural areas.
We use the rural counties because they are stable in their residence and they have been in this lifestyle for at least 20 to 30 years.
More than 350 workers were trained. They carefully surveyed the diet and lifestyle of 6,500 people in the chosen counties. Urine and blood samples were also taken. In 1983, Doctors Campbell, Chen, and their collaborators began to analyze the vast amount of information that had been collected. The job would take years. After 8 weeks eating plant-based foods, Zhou Yicoin was still off all his medications.
When I started this, I had all these side effects from medication and from my being so unhealthy. But now I'm getting in better shape every day. I feel more healthy. I very seldom get tired during the day. I just feel so good all the time. This is a scale that I weigh myself on, and it started about 8 weeks ago, way up here around 218, 220. And now it's bouncing between 180 and 185. None of my belts fit. This one here, I actually had to have 2 new holes punched in because I like the belt so much. Nothing fits. I got to go shopping. It's just everything, all my clothes. A good problem to have.
It's been fun for him because I think he's learned, in addition to the fact that he's seeing such great results, that he loves it.
I don't think he'll go back to this old
Yeah.
ways. He feels too good, and he likes. I mean, even if he started to eat and go off a little bit,
Right.
he feels too good. His energy's too good. He looks
Right.
younger,
And the fact that he would have to go back on all the meds, if he did, I think that that's a huge motivation for him to maintain the lifestyle